Okay, so we're going to talk about earned value today, and specifically how Microsoft Project facilitates your earned value management of your project. Now, I'm kind of assuming that you've got a background in earned value. You understand the various concepts because, quite frankly, there's not a lot in Microsoft Project for us to do. It is more about what Microsoft Project does or facilitates for us when it comes to doing an earned value assessment of our project. So I'm going to show here on the screen just for a second, the classic set of curves where we can look at our planned value or our baseline and then, track beside it our actual costs as well as our earned value and how we're going to use those curves or how they convey the information of variance, and from there we're going to get to our indices. But I'm not going to cover that here in this particular lecture. Now, I do have a lecture that covers off the theory of earned value, and certainly if you're interested, I haven't to date posted it publicly, but if you're interested, I could probably give you a link to that. Send me a little note and we'll see what we can do. So what does Microsoft Project do for us for earned value? Well, first off, we have to make sure that our project is in the right spot. So we've got a project, we've completely filled out all of its tasks with all of the estimates associated with each of those work packages. So we've got cost estimates for each of those packages. We've got time estimates for each of those packages. And then at the end of all of the planning process, we set our baseline. You have to have set your baseline on your complete project in order to start looking at earned value. From there, and you'll recall in the last lecture or tutorial, we started to track our progress. And so we would set a status date, and then we would update our project to that status date, and then we could see the variance from our baseline. And you see here on the screen right now, I'm showing our tracking Gantt, which is where we left off at the end of the last tutorial. So you can see a status date. So having set a status date is absolutely essential when it comes to earned value, because it's to that date that we're going to do our various measurements. And so we've got a fully defined project, we've set our baseline, and we've started to track our actual progress since that baseline up to a particular status date. And so that's all assumed when it comes to the starting point of looking at what Microsoft Project does for us when it comes to earned value. So let's get started and let's see what it does. So within our Gantt chart, and it could be any of the Gantt views, I'm going to go up to the sheet and change the sheet portion of our Gantt view, and I'm going to right click, and I don't see anything there that really looks like earned value. Perhaps you could go chasing down costs, but if we drop down more tables, we'll see here that there are 3 earned value tables that we're going to look at. We'll look at them in order. So the main one is labeled just straight up earned value, and if I hit apply, it will fill this out. Let me just check, make sure it's showing us everything that we want to see. And so let's look at the specific columns that Microsoft Project is providing to us. Note that they're filled out, right? So for those tasks that are underway, the values are actually filled out. For those tasks that are yet to come, they're not. And so that's something we have to understand. And so the first 3 columns are the basic metrics. Remember those 3 curves? Well, these are the values that make those 3 curves over time. So they're completed by task, and because they're completed by task, they're also associated through time. And so on our curves, of course, we're tracking time along the main axis, and then cost functions along the vertical axis. And so the time comes from its association to the specific task and when the task was actually completed. Now, remember in our resource sheet, we also told the program whether to prorate the accumulation of those expenses or to track them at the start or the finish of the specific task. And so that's all going to affect how that data is accumulated when we looked at earned value. So let's look at the first one. So the first column is planned value, or BCWS. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about the other alternative acronyms for these various values. So BCWS is the budgeted cost of work scheduled, and that means the same thing as planned value. I'm going to stick to the key terminology: planned value, earned value, and actual cost. But sometimes when you're looking for this data, you have to remember the other acronym in order to get it out of Microsoft Project correctly. So planned value, of course, is your baseline. It is the work. So we're using dollars to express the work that you were expected to have done in your plan by a particular date. So if you have 3 tasks planned to be completed by a certain date, and you know the estimate for each of those tasks, you add those up, you get your planned value. And so there's your planned value, and you can see it's been filled out for each of the tasks that are underway or completed. And then we have the earned value, and you can see the drop down, beautiful hover over this, and you can get a reminder both of the formulas that make them the more complex variances and indices, as well as a description of what the variable is. Yeah, so our earned value is the work or value that's actually been completed as expressed in a monetary form. And so depending on how much work we've completed and how we're going to choose to prorate the expression of that work, it would be in dollars the amount of work that we've actually completed as per our status date. And then we have the actual cost. Now, actual cost is fairly straightforward, self-explanatory. It's the actual money we spent to accomplish the work that we've completed up into our status date. And so one caution that I would give you, so there is another column called actual cost, but it is the actual cost up until the current date, as compared to the actual cost up to our status date, which would be the ACWP. So, there could be variation depending on whether you've accumulated any costs between the status date and the actual date. So just be aware of that. So those are the 3 main components or metrics that go into our various calculations. And so from there, we start to look at variance. And so our next 2 columns are variance. So they're the schedule variance and the cost variance. Now, the schedule variance, and you see it gives the formula down at the bottom of the little pop-up box if you hover over it, but it uses the other metrics. Or sort of the other variables when it comes up with that formula. And so our schedule variance is our earned value less our planned value, right? So EV minus PV, and that's going to tell us what our schedule variance is. And of course, it's expressed in a monetary form, but it's telling us, quite frankly, whether we're ahead or behind schedule. Now, if it's negative, we're behind schedule, right? Anything negative, and that's why they set up the formulas the way they do. It's going to tell us that something took longer to complete than it really did, and that's our schedule variance. Then we have our cost variance, and it does the same thing as the schedule variance does for us, except it's looking at the budget rather than the schedule. And so we're going to take our earned value and we're going to subtract from it our actual cost. And so this is the amount of work we achieved in monetary terms, less the cost it took us to achieve it. So if it took us more money to achieve it than we had work we've achieved, it's going to be negative, and so we're running behind budget, we're running over budget. Now, the rest of this sheet is aimed at projections for our completion. And so I'm going to jump a column here. First off, our budget at completion, or BAC, is really the full up projected cost from our plan. How much did we expect our project to cost us? And so that's our budget at completion, and that's plugged in here. Then we have our estimate at completion. Now, the estimate at completion, again, I assume you have some background in the theory here. Basically, it's going to look at our actual cost to date, and then it's going to add to it an estimate of our cost to complete the project. Now, one of the features of earned value is that it assumes the same efficiency moving forward as you've had historically in the project. So if we're running 10% behind budget, up until the status date, it will assume when estimating the cost to complete that we're going to run 10% over budget on the remaining work to be done. And so that will give us our estimate at completion by taking our actual cost and adding to it the estimate to complete. And of course, the difference between these two is our variance at completion, or how much are we expecting to be over or under budget. And again, it maintains a negative is a negative thing, or is a bad thing. So if it's negative, that means we're over budget. And so this would show that we're almost $1,000 estimated over budget at the end of our project here. So that's the main sheet. All three of our metrics are key, variances, and then our estimates for the completion of our project. Now, if I change the sheet to the next two, and they deal with schedule and cost. So we go down again to more tables. We'll bring up the cost indicators. We apply that. Let's make sure we have everything showing. So we have the earned value cost indicator sheet up on our Gantt chart right now, and a lot of the information that's contained in it is the same as what we saw in the last one. So let's see first off what's the same, and then we can just focus in on what's different. And so we start off with our two key metrics. And so it has our planned value and our earned value. And it doesn't have our actual cost column, which is kind of strange because this is a cost sheet. I don't know why that one is missing. I would be inclined to include the actual cost of work performed, and perhaps drop off the earned value or leave all three. But anyway, I think the cost column should be here. You can certainly add it. Why don't we do that? We'll insert the column and we go actual cost. Now keep in mind, remember I was telling you the actual cost in project can be ever so slightly different than the actual cost of work performed. So I'm going to use the acronym actual cost of work performed, and we see that that's here, and so we can put that in if we wanted to. Not saying you have to, but you can. So those first three columns are all the fundamental metrics which you've seen before. And then if we look at the end of the table, I'm going to have to extend it here now just a little bit. So these three, so our budget at completion, our estimate at completion, and our variance at completion, we've seen those before. They were in the last table and they haven't changed. So we don't have to worry about them. The TCPI has been added. And so what has been added are our variance. So we have our cost variance. Now, so we calculated our cost variance in the last one. And now we're going to start to play with it and refine it and then turn it into an index. So if we hover over our cost variance percentage, we see that basically it's taking our cost variance and it's dividing it through by the earned value. And so it's giving us a better feel for how much this variance is relative to the actual value. Is it large or is it not? And that, because of course the cost variance itself, without knowing what it's being compared to, is just an absolute dollar number, and it doesn't have the same impact to know whether we're 10% over budget or under budget. And so that's what the cost value percentage is. The cost performance index, which can be hugely valuable, is basically we're taking our earned value and dividing it through by the actual cost. And so it's great. So cost performance index, if it's greater than 1, then we're doing well. If it's below 1, then we're actually running over budget. And so that's not a great thing. So we've already talked about those. Those are all the same. And finally, you get to our TCPI. And of course, the TCPI is the to complete performance index. And so if we look at its hover over it, basically what we're looking at is the budgeted completion less the budgeted cost of work performed or the earned value. And so that's your amount of work remaining if we have the difference of those two. And then we're going to divide it through by the budget remaining, which is our budget at completion less the actual cost to date. And so this is going to give us an index as to how we're doing as far as work done or work remaining compared to budget remaining. And in this case, it's actually flipped a little bit. So if it's over 1, we have more work than we have money. Whereas if it's below 1, we're being efficient and we actually are doing well. And so that's what that chart is all about. Really what it's giving us is the cost variance percentage and the cost performance index, very common indices that are used. And then to do the same thing for schedule, we go back to more tables. We change it to the schedule indicators. So we start off, we have our planned value and our earned value. You can add your actual cost, but this one's about schedule, so we don't necessarily need it. We have our schedule variance, which we've seen calculated before, and now we're going to do the same thing by turning it as a percentage. And in this case, to get it as a percentage, we're going to take our schedule variance and we're going to divide it through by our planned value. So the budgeted cost of work scheduled, and that's our planned value. Again, it gives you a relative appreciation for how badly you're doing in schedule, good or bad. And then we can get our schedule performance index. And of course, our schedule performance index is our earned value less our planned value. And so that's a key metric. Again, if it's below 1, as is normal for most of our indices, that would be a negative thing. So that means in this case we're behind schedule, as you see is true in this case. So the one metric that Microsoft Project doesn't offer, if it's one that your institution uses, is the cost schedule index, which kind of tries to combine in a single index overall performance metric, which trades off cost performance with schedule performance. It's a simple thing to calculate. It is possible to add it here to Microsoft Project. It just means we're going to have to use one of their calculation fields. And I'm going to talk about calculation fields in a separate aside video. So eventually there will be a link up here that we can follow and perhaps add, if it's important to you, the cost schedule index. So that's all of the information that's available within Microsoft Project with respect to earned value. Of course, earned value is all about reporting. And so let's look very quickly at how Microsoft Project collates all of this information into a quick report. And so if we go up to report and we look at cost reports, we can go to the earned value report. And we see a report here. Now, these are extremely customizable. You can do a lot with them. You can change them around and make them look the way you want them to look, or you can create your own custom report and include any of these fields because it's just drawing the information from the database. Now, it has 3 graphs in each of those graphs. So the first shows you the 3 curves, if you will. Note that once you get to uncompleted tasks, it just zeroes them all out. And so that's this 0 bit tail, if you will, beyond the status state. It's not going to do anything for us. It'd probably be easier if it just didn't complete them. I wouldn't mind if it actually showed the plan value all the way through to the end. That would probably be useful, but that's not the way the reports are scheduled. So you can change them a bit. So we have our first one with the 3 metrics. Of course, it's a time axes down here along the bottom on the x-axis. We can edit that to change. So right now it's showing as weeks every week, and of course we have 2 status updates. So that probably makes a degree of sense, but we could, even by choosing weeks, it will change how the x-axis is labeled, which would be a value to actually have the weeks there. Let's see what it looks like with days. I don't think we're going to love it, but we can always look at days. And there we go, and we can see it with more precision with days, and you can play with that, of course, make it larger and put it on a page, export it to other tools. Now the next one is our variance, and so you've seen the variance calculated, our schedule variance and our cost variance, and so this graph plots out those variances over the life of the project, again zeroing out once we get to our status state. And again, like the other one, you can change it, edit things, add different fields. If I go to days on this one, and we'll see it doesn't make it's probably too refined given the nature of it. And then finally, we have our indices down at the bottom. And again, we can track our indices and change it as we see fit. Let's see what it looks like with days. And there we have our indices tracking out. And of course, we know the importance of being above and below 1 in this case. So that's the report, the earned value report that you see in Microsoft Project. I do think that you probably want to spend some time to get it customized so that it's presenting itself appropriate to your specific project. You might want to even just start from scratch and build your own custom report, and you can certainly do that. You can take this information, if you're doing a more substantive report, and incorporate it into a Word document or something else. So there's a lot that can be done. I'm just giving you a snippet of it. Earn value as it pertains to Microsoft Project. You got to understand what it's telling you, but it's basically doing all of the key calculations for you and providing you a great deal of information as to the health of your project, as to whether it's on budget or over budget, on schedule or lagging behind schedule. There's a lot of information there, a lot of indices. You can set up your dashboards and reporting, and so it's a great tool providing you information on your project. So hopefully you found that useful. Again, there is a link if you don't know or if you don't understand earned value, you've never studied it. I will try to put a link down below, or you can contact me and I'll get you a link that explains earned value from first principles. So hopefully you enjoyed that. You're going to get out of this one. I think the next tutorial up is dealing with change requests. So we're going to do a more substantive addition to our project that was not envisioned, and how we're going to manage that within Microsoft Project. So hopefully you come back for that. So we'll see you then.